Eric James Smith, welcome to Maya Muses.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm so happy to have you here. For those of you who do not know Eric, everybody here, I'm the only one who knows Eric. He is an expert in ufology, and you can find more about him at strangeobserver.com. That's strangeobserver.com. Full disclosure, Eric is also pretty much my brother-in-law. So holidays get fun. Holidays are fun at our house.
I'm not getting any favors. This is just purely professional. So no Christmas gifts are coming either way. Well, yeah, they probably are, but nothing because of this.
No, but you wait for it. It's in the mail. You're going to love it. Okay, Eric, I asked you to be here today because this week there was a huge drop of information from this Israeli scientist, the former head of the Israeli space program, by the name of Haim Eshed. Is that how you say his name?
I think that's how you would pronounce it.
He says that the Galactic Federation exists, and has contacted the U.S. government, and it's on Mars. I'm not saying it. That's what he said. You step in if I'm ever wrong.
Sure. This was a funny week. The news dropped, I think, over last weekend or maybe Monday morning, and I immediately started getting texts and phone calls Monday morning from friends, from UFO witnesses that I've talked to. I got an offer to be on the local radio program here in Rhode Island. I did that a couple days ago. I don't know what it is about this particular story in what has been a couple crazy years of UFO stuff. I don't know what it is about this particular news drop that created so much craziness around it, but no other news going back to when the Washington Post and Politico story dropped in 2017 about confirming that our government was spending money on looking into the UFO phenomenon. That didn't cause as much attention, at least directed my way, as this crazy bit of news, and I think that that's pretty insane. I don't know if it's the Trump connection or just people wanting to believe that this could possibly be true. I don't know.
Well, he's credible. This man has the highest honors.
He seems to be credible. I mean, he is from a world government. He's high up in aerospace or aero defense. I can't exactly remember what his title is, but someone gave him this job, and so in ufology, you want to give a lot of credence to people who are witnesses who are pilots or military personnel or police officers or technicians or people who you would imagine would be pretty reliable observers. You know, people whose job it is to kind of be experts about what's going on in the skies. Now, that's a little different than what this guy's talking about. And I think that whenever anybody is making a claim like this, obviously it's got to be taken with a little more than a grain of salt, especially considering that this news came out while he's in the process of trying to sell a book that he just put out. And that always has to be taken into consideration when someone has some kind of wild claim or something that just seems maybe to some people too good to be true, or some fantastical claim. If you look at where it's coming from and why this guy is dropping this information now, you have to be skeptical about it. I'm not saying it can't be true. I'm not saying it isn't true, but you do have to be skeptical of the source when someone is trying to stir up attention to sell a book.
Yeah. Do you think it is to sell a book? Or do you think it is maybe he's older and he's having dreams?
I don't know. So the information came out in an article in a Hebrew language newspaper or website. So I don't know if possibly something could have gotten lost in the translation as well, or mixed up in the translation. I've read this article from a couple different sources and from a couple different angles, and it seems to be pretty consistent in what he's saying. So I have to believe it's probably not some kind of a translation error or a like hyperbole in translation, but it was originally from a Hebrew language website where he was being interviewed about his book. And I imagine that he talked about other elements of his book, but this was the one thing that was either focused on in the original article or taken from the original article and went around the world as news. So I don't know.
Yeah. For people who don't know, can you explain to them what disinformation is?
Well, disinformation in the world, in the UFO world, is it comes from an aspect of ufology that tends to come from the end of the spectrum of ufology that is more nuts and bolts. And in a nutshell, what that means is the belief or the idea that UFOs are technological, physical craft that are physical, that exist in our reality. They are real. They are being piloted or controlled by either non-human intelligence or they're the product of our government's own top secret advanced aerospace projects, or a combination of both. The disinformation comes from, especially in the 70s and 80s and early 90s, there were a lot of UFO witnesses that came forward and wrote a lot of books purporting to know a lot of deep inside information. And the idea of the disinfo part of this is that a lot of people believe, and it had come out to be true, that certain people within the government were feeding information to these witnesses that was not real or not entirely real or completely unreal, in an effort to ultimately paint UFO witnesses or people who purported to have this top secret knowledge as nuts and crazy, insane, what have you. It was an actual attempt to feed untruths to the public, to the UFO following public for starters, in an effort to discredit UFO research, especially research into potentially top secret government projects. So that's where the disinfo element of something in ufology comes from.
So do you think he could be deliberately trying to deceive the public?
I think that any explanation for this is on the table. I think that there is a chance that he might personally believe this himself and wanted to include it in his book, again, in order to make it a little juicier, maybe. I don't know. I read an overview of the guy's book. It seems interesting enough in itself. I don't know why he needed to claim that there is a Galactic Federation of planets that have been in touch with Donald Trump, of all people. You gotta sort of wonder what anyone's motivations would be. I mean, I guess it's possible that someone could truly have, the best intentions and just want this information to be public, but you also have to... A guy who is this smart has also got to... You would think that he would understand that without the proof behind it, that extraordinary claims like this are basically meaningless without any kind of proof or evidence or, actual contact being disclosed to the public, that this is real. In absence of anything like that, it's just a kind of a funny story,
He's got the reputation.
Maybe. I mean, I guess so. I can't say that I have had the time to fully look into who this guy is and his history, but the fact that he seems to have this platform, and that said, anyone can write a book.
It's true. That's true. And you know what? At the end of his years, he might think that I need to make this money. That's totally possible.
Yeah, and I don't know if, again, I wish I'd had the time, and maybe I should have been better prepared for this, but I wish I looked into more as to where this guy is at right now in his career and life. If maybe it's a desperate cash grab. I don't know if he was forced out of his previous position, or whether he just simply retired, or whether he was, possibly forced out for being a whack job. I really don't know. I should look into that more.
If he was, we wouldn't know about it.
Yeah.
They would just say he retired because, he's a much older gentleman, and they would never tell us that they had a whack job running the Israeli space program.
You're probably right about that. And also, you would think that if there was anything like that in the guy's background or history, that when this news sort of took off around the world, they would be referring to him as, for example, not that he is, but referring to him as like a, disgraced aerospace head, or maybe sort of painting him as more of a nut job. But I haven't seen that. So you might be right that his reputation up until now, including now, might be, respected.
I haven't seen anything saying otherwise. It says that he was running the program for decades and then he left. I'm assuming because he retired. I haven't seen anything to tarnish his reputation at all. In fact, he said, because my reputation is so great, that's why I've come out with this. But then again, you never know. I don't want to smear him in any way, but there are a number of possibilities as to why someone could be saying this.
I think anything is on the table at this point, especially this year.
Especially this year. I don't buy that Donald Trump kept his mouth shut.
So, in regards to that, and I've thought about this for a long time, I don't fully believe that any of our presidents, at least the modern presidents, have been made fully aware of the extent of the knowledge that other elements of the government and military might have about UFOs, which might be nothing. I mean, there's also a really good chance that there isn't anything more to be known besides what the public does know. If I were to put my money on it, I would guess that there is maybe a cache or a handful of more of these videos similar to the TikTok video or other type of evidence, for lack of a better word, that will be slowly sort of trickled out in a form of like a soft disclosure over the next couple years. But the idea that there is some vast, huge secret, such as a Galactic Federation of planets, or anything similar, such as actual knowledge of contact, I don't necessarily believe that is true. It could be. It could absolutely be true. But if I had to guess, I would say that there's not much more to know. Our government doesn't seem to know a lot more than what they're letting on, or at least maybe that's what they're trying to tell us. But coming back to the president thing, I don't think that on day one of a presidency, I don't think that there's this myth that, the first day of a president taking office, like he's given the secrets of UFOs. I don't think that there is a secret. I don't think that there's much more to be known than what we know. And I think that part of the disinformation might be misleading the public into thinking that our government knows a lot more than they do. And I think that part of this sort of cagey denial might possibly be covering up for the fact that they don't know anything more. They're just trying to sort of act like they do know to keep up either the disinformation or for a sense of like technological superiority. If our government can sort of be cagey and say that, oh no, we don't know anything about extraterrestrial civilizations with a wink, it might signal to other countries that we do know something. Whereas if our government was to come out and say, we don't know shit, like that, you kind of lose the upper hand there.
Yeah. And it makes them seem less powerful.
Yeah, I think that the illusion of there being a secret is more powerful than whether there actually is or not. But I also don't believe that the presidents know anything more about UFOs than the common UFO person. Besides maybe a handful of videos that are in the pipeline, or maybe a little bit more evidence that we might think is a big deal, such as more footage, possible exotic materials retrieved either from space or from a crash or whatever. But I don't think that there's some huge secret that our government is sitting on that is going to be magically revealed by some magnanimous administration someday. I think that that's kind of a pipe dream that a lot of UFO people, especially people who are so heavily emotionally invested in the idea of a possible disclosure someday, it seems to be the wet dream for that type of UFO person.
So about these videos that we have seen, the TikTok video, and then we saw a recent one from an Air Force pilot, I think. It was a white craft. I'll actually put this on the screen so that people can see. But we've seen a few videos recently that the Air Force says we don't have that technology.
Yeah.
Whether or not they're being honest, and we honestly do not have that technology, I'm not sure. But what do you think of these recent disclosures of these videos?
I think that they've been pretty incredible, and it's really awesome to see. I mean, I don't tend to focus on the nuts and bolts end of ufology. I kind of like the other end of ufology, which looks at UFOs more of a more from a folklore angle, as far as entities and things that have always been with humanity from the very beginning, in the fact of, indigenous cultures around the world. A lot of their origin myths come from the idea of star people and, civilizations arriving from help from the skies, or at least worshiping cosmological things based on the stars. I think that that's more interesting. But as far as the nuts and bolts end of UFO stuff, these videos are pretty compelling. When they first came out a few years ago, in the wake of the Washington Post political article in 2017, is when a lot of these videos started coming out over the past few years. They seem pretty crazy. I mean, and again, you're seeing people who are who should be considered pretty reliable witnesses. Air Force pilots who are experts in their technology. They know what they're doing, supposedly. And to see them and to hear the recordings of them being dumbfounded by what they're seeing is pretty cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, could it possibly be, what I'm thinking is that the Chinese or the Russians have technology that they're not sharing with us. The Chinese will not share their technology with us. They'll take ours, but they're not going to tell us what they got going on. Historically, the Chinese don't do that because they're smarter than that. So I wonder if it is a foreign government that has technology that we simply don't have yet.
So there's always the possibility that that's true. And this end of ufology deals with the ideas that this is either advanced technology that either our government or another government has created that is 10, 15, 30, 50 years in advance. I do believe that our government and our military government has advanced technology that we don't know about. That's just that's a normal thing, for your especially your military government. I mean, this is what happened when the stealth bomber came out back in the 80s and 90s when I was young. Like, it was rumored to be around forever, and then it came out. So this end of ufology deals with the idea of there being this advanced technology that our government or another government is either sitting on and slowly reveals over time, or the technology being from a non-human intelligence, or a mixture of both. I wouldn't be surprised by any military around the world having advanced technology that we don't know about. I don't know. It's just one of those things you can't really say whether China or Russia has, or the United States has the ability to make these kinds of things that we're seeing in these videos. I mean, these pilots seem pretty dumbfounded by what they're saying, what they're seeing. So yeah, it's fascinating. And when you watch the videos, this thing is doing some pretty incredible aerial maneuvers. And again, watching the videos, it's kind of hard to tell exactly how big the object is, exactly where it is. You're seeing it move against a backdrop of the ocean, and it's kind of hard to. The perspective is, you're looking at these onboard high-tech cameras that it's hard to see the whole picture. But when you listen to the reports of the pilots talking about it afterwards, talking about how big this object was, it was actually quite huge. It was like 30 feet long, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So we're not talking about something that is the size of one of these fighter planes, which are pretty small, kind of, compared to the pilot. These objects, this Tic Tac object, was not very small at all. It was actually pretty gigantic compared to a fighter plane. The idea of something that size being able to move like that is pretty insane. Again, whether this video that was released by our government is legitimate or another product of disinformation, I mean, it could entirely be fabricated. Remains to be seen whether we'll ever know the answer to that.
So you talked about the ocean briefly, but there have been reports of these sort of crafts moving around the ocean. Just in your opinion, I know there's very little evidence for this. It's sort of speculation. Could these crafts be native to our planet and live under the ocean?
I guess for that to be true, you have to be willing to believe that there is an underwater civilization of technologically advanced, either humans, a breakaway civilization, or a parallel civilization that has possibly always been there, or possibly came here from somewhere else and lives in our oceans. And this civilization, or whatever they are able to build bases around the globe underwater, and they launch these ships from them. It's a pretty crazy sci-fi idea. If you're able to get your brain to that place to believe that something like that could happen, then yeah, sure. It's a cool idea either way.
It's a cool idea. I'm wondering, I'm not saying that I believe it, but I'm thinking of how many Earth-like planets there are and how close they are, and what's more likely, that they were able to travel here and had the interest of traveling here and set up shop on Mars, and then they go in the ocean sometimes, and they're just like, what's in your ocean? This is cool. Maybe they do. Because we have cool oceans,
The oceans are cool. Our oceans are really cool.
Yeah, so they could just be like, oh, let me check this ocean out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you have to realize when you're thinking about whether UFOs are actual spacecraft from actual other planets is you do have to factor in the truths about space, how huge space is and how far away things are. Now, for any civilization to be able to travel to the closest star by what we physically know of as far as the means to get there, which is just, at this point for us, simple propulsion, it would take us hundreds or thousands of years to get to the nearest planet. Now, if you want to think about it in a sci-fi way, will we someday discover a way to traverse huge distances through space? It's possible. And if there is a civilization or civilizations out there that are millions of years older than us, they might be there already. So, but one of the things you have to think about is if a civilization was able to get here, that means that they have mastery of technology so far beyond what we have or know of here. What could they possibly want with us that they couldn't provide for themselves in another way? So I guess my point is that if they're able to get here, they don't need us.
Mm-hmm. Well, according to this Mr. Eshed, they say that they want to find the fabric of the universe and they need our help finding the fabric of the universe. So maybe that's something organic in our planet. Maybe there's a material in our planet they don't have in their planet, like a chemical compound. That's entirely possible.
I can't imagine what else we'd have to offer them, to be honest. It's hard to believe a technologically advanced civilization that has the means to get to us. It's hard to imagine them needing anything from us as far as our knowledge, our expertise in anything. But maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something genetic. Maybe they need genetic material from us that they can't synthesize. Maybe they need something from our planet that they can't synthesize. But it's hard to imagine. It's just hard. It's hard to wrap your brain around any of this. But if you want to think about it, that's how I feel about it. If someone's able to get here from another star, then I can't imagine what else they would need from us besides possibly entertainment.
Hey, we're entertaining. We are an entertaining species.
That's one way to put it.
We're goofy. If you don't have any stakes in the human race, we are fun to watch. We are goofy people.
But I have to imagine that their entertainment is also millions of years more advanced than ours. So, I mean, they got to be beyond what we're offering them too, right? I mean,
hey, we're still recycling these old Shakespeare plays and these old storylines. Maybe they're just like, they had to come and they had to meet Trump in person because they could not believe.
They might be here for our Shakespeare. You might be right.
Well, this kind of brings me to another point. Bob Lazar. What do you think about Bob Lazar? Can you tell people a little bit about Bob Lazar?
So Bob Lazar is a gentleman who worked for, or claims to have worked for, some of the top secret government aerospace stuff in the desert around Groom Lake, Area 51, regarding possibly crashed flying saucers, retrieval of alien life, and also the development of technology reverse engineered from a crashed craft. So his story came out in the UFO world in the 80s and was continually scrutinized forever up until now. It's still going on. I mean, the documentary that came out last year about him is pretty great. It's a compelling story, and I just feel like when it comes to a person like this or a subject or an idea like this, it's really hard to know. There's a lot of, I guess, what you would call evidence and proof on both ends that he did work where he claimed to have worked, that he knows some of the things that he claims to know, but it's hard to say. He's a really awesome and interesting character in the world of ufology. I personally feel like I like him from watching the several documentaries and books I've read about him. He seems like a cool guy and possibly unfairly railroaded in a lot of ways, but I also have a hard time believing that he has knowledge of an element that has not been publicly disclosed that we know of yet.
He said something really interesting on the Joe Rogan interview, and he said that those crafts were thousands of years old.
Yeah, that was I did. He said that before, and I think he might have said that. I think that might be his. I think that's been consistently his story, or at least an aspect of his story. So
now I wonder if it is I know that it was crashed, and I know that he was saying that these crafts, the pilot compartment was for a smaller person.
So the ancient aliens idea, has become problematic. And the fact is that it always was problematic because it wanted to give credit to the building of our great civilizations to mystical white people from space, as opposed to the people who actually built this stuff, which is the indigenous cultures of our planet. Now, I don't think that it is entirely impossible that the Earth has been visited over the millennia, but the idea that that was the vital link or the vital development of us as a species or a civilization coming from help from the stars. A lot of the ancient astronaut stuff can be inherently racist. And I think that a lot of the people who look at it, they're not trying to be consciously racist, but I think that they're ignoring or overlooking the technological advancement of, cultures, prehistoric cultures around the world. So it's a tough area to be able to anymore put a lot of faith into. That said, if you look at cultures around the world and their mythological, cosmological history that they have, especially First Nation people in North America and indigenous peoples around the world, a lot of their origin myths involve star people and help from the sky gods, star people coming down. It's an important part of a lot of the cosmological origin story of a lot of peoples. It doesn't necessarily mean that without this star god assistance that people weren't able to build the pyramids, or people weren't able to build things like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. These are incredibly advanced and ancient sites that were built by the people who lived there at the time, using their own knowledge and tools, which knowledge that has been lost. And just because that knowledge was lost over time due to, all the reasons that civilizations can rise and fall, climate change, and just, the natural movement of stuff. Just because that knowledge was lost doesn't mean that they couldn't have known this stuff on their own. When I was younger, I was really super into ancient astronaut stuff. I thought it was the coolest thing. I thought it was really fascinating to think that, in millennia past, we were visited by aliens who helped us build these great things. Because my thoughts were that, how would we know how to do something like that? But that's an inherently that's a very problematic way to look at ancient civilizations, to think that just because they're not that just because they were around so long ago and seemingly so non-technologically advanced, that they were not able to build these incredible things that they were able to build. And I think that it just speaks more to lost knowledge than us having been helped by star people.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true, especially when you're talking about climate change, because when you see the Egyptians, for example, we have no idea what's buried under the Sahara. That used to be lush land, which could have and did birth an incredible civilization. And we're slowly learning about what is lost under there when, the shift happened and it went from being lush to being the biggest desert. So it could have anything could be under there, and it could be entirely human, and just, something like that, some massive, what they would consider a climate disaster like that could have just changed everything, and all that knowledge is lost.
That's true. I do have to and want to trust scientists when it comes to anthropology and the origin of our own species and about how old humanity is. I would want to trust the folks that know a lot more about how old humanity is before I try to graft any other kind of idea onto that, because I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to to just come in here and say that, well, there must be civilizations older than what we know about. It's true that every number of years we find evidence of civilizations that are a little older and a little older. Göbekli Tepe is an example of that. And obviously the idea of, the sciences of archaeology and anthropology are all constantly evolving like any other science is. But I would be careful to ascribe to a theory that was too far out of whack from established science in those fields.
Yeah, no, I completely understand
as cool
that.
as those theories might be, as cool as cool as those theories might be of ancient civilizations that once lived on Antarctica when Antarctica was up in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean millennia ago. It's really cool, like a lot of Graham Hancock's theories. A lot of that stuff is really cool to think about, as long as it lines up with established science from anthropology and archaeology and geology when you get to a scale that's that massive.
I'm a little torn on that because the one thing that sets it apart for me is the water erosion on the Sphinx. And I'm like, oh, that's hard evidence. Okay, let's step back and see. Because it basically says that the Sphinx was built while there was still heavy rains in that area. So, okay, let me think about it. So basically anything's on the table. I don't necessarily believe that even star people had to come down and help people. If that changed, we have no idea. But I know what you mean. We have to wait for the Egyptologists to make their discoveries, and that's slow going. These archaeological discoveries are much slower than people think they are. Just because a lot of times things are lost to construction, and a lot of things are just lost under sand, and we don't know. And the missing piece of the puzzle, it could be in some parking lot somewhere or beneath a parking lot somewhere, and we might not find it.
That's true. And, they do keep making discoveries that evidence of civilizations that are thousands or tens or thousands of years older than what is sort of the establishment belief. But that's to be expected in a science like archaeology because it does change with time, but it does take a long time to change. It does take a long time for the established theories to be altered and changed with new discoveries. I think that you just have to make sure that there's a balance between what you want to believe and what is supported by the science. And it's tough for me to do that too sometimes because I want to be excited about cool shit too. And I want to believe that there was ancient civilizations that were seafaring civilizations before we knew about anything. And if there ever turns out to be really hard and compelling evidence to that changes the minds of established science, then great. But until then, you have to take it like anything as a really cool idea that doesn't quite have the science to support it. Maybe someday it will, but maybe it won't.
A hypothesis. These people, they
Sure.
have a hypothesis, and we got to test it over time, just like everything in science, and see where the information falls.
I mean, anyone can make up a hypothesis, so you might as well.
Yes. Well, people say conspiracy theories are hypotheses. They're not quite theories because they don't have enough evidence for them. They're still hypotheses.
Sure.
Now, what you said was very interesting about how the ancients have these stories of star peoples. I know I didn't warn you about this, but I just thought of this question right now. What do you think about the similarities between demon sightings in the past and alien sightings now?
So this is the idea of ufology that I find most fascinating, and it's the stuff that I like to think about rather than the nuts and bolts government conspiracy, technological secrets, hidden alien agenda type stuff. I like reading about and learning about and thinking about the idea that UFOs and UFO sightings and entities and things coming down from the sky is part of a long line of folklore, and hews to the idea that there is a magical world or a spiritual world or a hidden world beyond what we can see, and the idea that aliens or UFOs are our modern version of fae and demons and folklore and any number of things that people called stuff like this hundreds, thousands of years ago, and the possibility that UFOs are another element of that, and not just UFOs, but UFOs and abductions and cryptozoology and the idea of missing time and other time slips and other creatures, and it's part and parcel of a larger folklore background, and the idea that people have been seeing stuff like this forever, and it's evidenced by just literature, the history of folklore, and again, indigenous cultures, creation myths, the idea that there are things that are beyond our physical knowledge and things that are beyond our physical touch, and can manifest and can appear to us in any number of ways.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because some of these UFO abduction cases, they do seem kind of similar to what people used to think about demons in the Middle Ages. That's just what I know about from my history reading, and my history reading is kind of limited to like European history, kind of touches on other history such as ancient Indian history, but it's not so broad over the world. So that's why I relate it to demons, because this is what Europeans used to really believe were
sure,
out there.
and me too. I have a very Eurocentric idea because that's just what I was taught growing up, and I'm trying to read beyond that now, and I'm trying to educate myself in, cultures around the world and their origin myths and their sort of folklore myths, and what indigenous cultures think of when they what are their fairies, what are their fae folk, what are their Sasquatches, what are their ideas of creatures that are visiting them from beyond the veil, whatever their veil is, whatever their idea or perspective of what is the real world, the real natural physical world that they live in, and the spirit world, or the stars, or wherever their beliefs lie.
Mm-hmm. You also think, if you're doing a hallucinogenic substance under the stars, maybe that's what is associated. And so that's where the mythology comes from.
Well, I wouldn't know anything about that, of course, but
this is just, just spitballing here. Neither of us know anything about hallucinogenics.
No. But yeah, I mean, obviously that must have played a part in the construction of belief systems in ancient peoples. Like, whatever they could find to you can imagine them struggling to come up with explanations for the natural world around them, and throw into that the fact that for whatever reasons, maybe they're seeing things that aren't there, or maybe they're seeing spirits or demons or lights in the sky or orbs or, multidimensional Sasquatches. They could be seeing these things for any number of reasons. Number one, they could be seeing them because they were really there and they exist, or they could have been experimenting with any kind of consciousness expansion through diet or drugs, or for any sickness, illness. I mean, people could have had fevers and hallucinating things, things that weren't there, and it could become a belief system or a way to explain the natural world around them.
Yeah, it could be accidental too, and they think they're seeing it, but it's it's just moldy rye bread or something like
Yeah.
that, and it's ergot, and they say I did not take a substance because they didn't take a substance. They just ate what they normally ate, but it was a little bit off, and
Like
they're tripping.
yeah, like when that bear in The Bear eats all those mushrooms and then sees all the crazy butterflies floating around.
Yeah, mushrooms. People don't give them enough credit, but a lot of these ancient peoples are probably like, "What is this? What does this mushroom do? Maybe I should try it." And then all kind of things
Yeah.
happen.
Hey, good on them.
Can you think of any abduction stories that you find compelling?
There's a lot. There's a lot. Too many to kind of dip into briefly, but one that I really liked from it didn't happen recently, but I read the book recently. Is a book called The Andreasen Affair, and it's been a little over a year since I read the book for the last time, so I can't remember all the details. But in a nutshell, there was a family who was visited by slender, gray-looking, what they called aliens or entities. And I believe it was a mother and a daughter taken aboard a craft, and just the episode that they recount, their description of what they saw on this ship and what they experienced is so much more bizarre than just your boilerplate someone being abducted and being on a physical spaceship, and then they aren't, and there's missing time. This story, anybody who's interested in abduction stories should look into The Andreasen Affair. It's a great book. Beyond that, also, for nothing beats Whitley Strieber's Communion as far as just a sheer terrifying abduction experience over the course of a number of years. I mean, Communion is like the granddaddy of the abduction books. It's just so terrifying and great. I really love it. Say what you will about Whitley Strieber himself and the fact that there's like 10 or 15 books now, he keeps putting them out, but his original experience in that original book, Communion, that's just good stuff.
That's great. Audience, go get those books. We'll put them on the screen. If you're interested, read them, and then you'll make your own conclusion based on what you see. People do have shared hallucinations sometimes, or shared mania. That's not entirely unheard of.
No, it's not at all. It's something that's pretty documented that it is possible. It's the human mind is a crazy place.
Yeah, we were talking about recently about twins who did it, but mother and daughter, that's very close relations too.
Yeah.
Spouses often can get into I guess it's a feedback loop where one sees something, the other one sees it, and they physically see the same thing that's not there.
Yeah, a lot of the most credible UFO accounts are incidents that have been experienced by a group of people, typically families, who have been harassed by goblin-type creatures in the woods of Kentucky, or whole families who have been abducted, or a couple members of a family, or whole families who have experienced missing time. Those are obviously the more credible stories because they're being related by a group of people who on the surface don't have any reason to fabricate a story like this, because most of the time the attention that they get is detrimental to their well-being. I mean, I don't think that there's anybody who has, in the history of UFO experiences, besides possibly Whitley Strieber, who underwent a terrifying experience, who actually came out of it like successful and who are in a better place. Most families and most people who publicly come out and say that they've either seen a UFO or had an abduction experience, their lives are essentially ruined. They're ridiculed, and they're not Yeah, I mean, there's no real good reason for anybody to want to, other than them just wanting to tell the truth about an experience because they feel like they should, and they should be able to. And it's unfortunate that that happens to folks who do come forward with UFO experiences. And I think that that's part of the reason why that there aren't more experiences being related to the public, is because people are just they don't want their lives ruined by being perceived as a crazy UFO person.
Yeah, I mean, who's going to hire them? Just think of it like that. If you Google someone and they have this UFO experience, are you really going to trust them to represent your company? And that's sort of how we punish people in America, is by not giving them access to resources, to money, to jobs. And so why would anybody, except for these pilots who probably have a pension with the Air Force and have a guaranteed paycheck, why would they come out and say anything?
Yeah, and, it's definitely troublesome for a pilot to come out and say that they've saw something weird. There's a definite risk that they will lose their job for doing that. So that's, there is a good amount of witness accounts from pilots, commercial pilots, military pilots from all over the world. But a lot of times, the repercussions they faced from coming forward with these stories was definitely detrimental, sometimes at the expense of their career. You have to be in a really secure spot to feel comfortable coming forward with a UFO story, especially if you are someone who is a pilot or a military pilot or a general or a high-ranking technician in some field. I mean, it's you're really putting your career at risk by coming forward with something like that. And also at the other end of that, a family who lives in a small town in Kentucky who comes forward saying that their house is being assaulted by goblins, is ostracized from the community, and in centuries past would have been thought of as witches or possessed by demons. It's not that long ago that folks like that would be terrified to say anything because, for fear of being thought of as being, a vehicle for demonic possession. Yeah, exactly. Like,
there are consequences. If back in the day you said something like a demon came out, they'll be like, well, did your daughter attract the demon with her period? And they'll burn them at the stake.
Yeah, like, it's not even really safe now to come out with a UFO story in a small town where everybody knows everything and it's very provincial. It's not safe to do that now. Much less, 100, 200, 300 years ago. Yeah, you'd be branded as witches and you'd be driven out of town.
At best, you'd be driven out of town.
At best. That's the best case scenario.
Yeah. Wow. Let me see if I think we covered a lot, but am I leaving anything out? Should the audience know something that I did not mention?
Well, I can't think of anything specific. I mean, the world of UFOs and thinking about what this stuff is is so huge that there's always something more to talk about. So why don't we just do it next time?
We'll do it next time. And audience, if you have any questions specific to UFOs, folklore, mythology, please let me know so I can be prepared to ask Eric your questions. Thank you so much for coming, Eric.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. And that is Eric Smith at strangeobserver.com. I'll put it at the bottom of the screen. Go check him out. Go check out what he researches. And you're going to go down a rabbit hole. I guarantee it's going to last you the rest of 2021 or all of 2021 and definitely the rest of this year if you make it through.
Hope so. Hope you're satisfied.
Yes. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.